Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're going to connect the dots between our own brains, a super common virus, and the very dawn of animal life on Earth. It sounds kind of random, right? Well, stick with me.
All right, so let's jump right into this puzzle. We're going to look at 3 recent scientific findings that, at first, seem to be from completely different universes. They each tell a really fascinating story on their own, but I promise you, there is a common thread that ties them all together.
So let's start close to home. I mean, really close, right inside our own heads. We're looking at 2 new studies that peer deep into our neurology, and they're revealing potential links that could totally change how we think about brain health.
Okay, first up, a new study just dug through a ton of health records. We're talking over 2 decades worth, and it uncovered a new piece of the MS puzzle, and it zeroes in on the incredibly common Epstein-Barr virus.
You know, for years, researchers have been on the hunt for what triggers this really complex condition. MS can cause major disability, and it often shows up when people are in the absolute prime of their lives.
So, the big question, what did they find? Well, after they accounted for all the other usual risk factors, they discovered that people who'd had infectious mononucleosis, mono, were a whopping 3 times more likely to develop MS than people who hadn't. 3 times. That's a big deal.
And the lead author of the study is really clear here. This finding isn't just some interesting statistic. It actually opens up completely new pathways for potential prevention research. It shifts the whole focus toward, hey, maybe we can head this disease off before it even gets a foothold.
Okay, let's switch gears for a second to another recent study. This one was looking at what factors might actually protect our brain health over the long haul. They followed nearly 800 people who were, on average, just 39 years old when the study began. So, scientists can now measure these things called biomarkers. In this case, a protein called tau, which act like early warning signs for diseases like Alzheimer's, way before any memory problems show up. So what they did was check everyone's vitamin D levels, and then, get this, an average of 16 years later, they scanned their brains to see what was going on with those proteins. Okay, now this is where it gets really, really important. See that crucial point at the bottom? Both of these studies are super careful with their language. They show a link, an association. They do not prove that mono causes MS or that vitamin D prevents Alzheimer's. And let me tell you, in science, that distinction is everything. All right, so we've been deep inside the brain. Now, I want you to zoom way, way out with me. We're going from the micro world in our heads to the macro history of life on Earth for our third and final clue. For the longest time, the story of how animals got started seemed pretty straightforward, The fossil records seem to tell this very specific story about how and when our distant ancestors just kind of suddenly appeared. This event even has a cool name, the Cambrian explosion. Think of it like life's Big Bang, a seemingly overnight burst of evolutionary creativity, where life went from pretty simple to incredibly complex in what's basically the blink of a geological eye. But you know where this is going, right? Science is never that neat and tidy. Researchers have just unearthed an absolute treasure trove of fossils in China, over 700 of them, and they are seriously complicating that whole sudden explosion picture. And this is where you can really see why it's such a game changer. Just look at the dates. These complex animals, the Zhongshuan biota, they existed millions of years before the Cambrian explosion was even supposed to have started. They were already thriving in the period right before it. So what does this all mean? Well, that old idea of a sudden explosion is giving way to a new view of a more gradual slow burn. It suggests that the evolutionary fuse for this big bang of life was lit much, much earlier than we ever thought. As the lead researcher puts it, the foundations were already there. These fossils are those transitional forms, the missing links that show a more continuous, developing story of how life actually evolved.
So let's pull all the way back. We have a virus that's associated with MS. We have vitamin levels associated with early signs of Alzheimer's. And we have ancient fossils that are rewriting the very first chapter of animal evolution.
And we are back to our central puzzle. What in the world connects these 3 seemingly random discoveries? All right, let's finally solve it.
The connection? It isn't some hidden fact about biology or geology. The connection is the process itself.
Each one of these stories is a perfect snapshot of how our understanding of the world actually grows and changes.
I mean, you can see the pattern right here. First, scientists observe clues and associations. Then, they unearth new evidence that complicates the picture. That new evidence forces them to challenge the old established ideas. And here's the best part. It just sparks a whole new wave of questions that drives the next generation of research.
So if you take one thing away from this, let it be this. Science isn't a dusty textbook filled with facts we've all memorized. It's a method. It's a living story that's constantly being revised. Finding an association is the exciting start of a new chapter, not the end of the book. And sometimes, yeah, a single fossil find can force us to rewrite the introduction entirely. That's not failure, that's progress.
And that leaves us with a pretty powerful thought to end on, doesn't it? It's the reason we keep digging, keep observing, and keep questioning in the first place. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.